Hey, everybody, I'm excited to be with you all this week, and I'm excited to join the Google call right after this at 7 o'clock, where we're going to hang out. We're going to play Scribblo, which is this fun game that Mark has introduced to us, and then we're going to have a conversation about what it means to have God-sized goals and what to do when we find opposition in our goals. But first, make sure if you want to pause this video and to get a cup of hot chocolate, a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, whatever it is, because there's snow outside, it's cold, and then just make that cup and then put your feet up and watch this video, right? Have a good time with it. Shout out to Faith for getting me this mug. It's a cow mug if you can't tell. She had me for our Encounter Secret Santa, and I just love that mug. It's pretty rad. So feel free to pause, make a hot drink, and then come back. So we're in this series called Goals, and we're looking at what it means to invite God into our goals, and also what it might mean to have God-sized goals. And we started our series off by looking at New Year's resolutions. And New Year's resolutions are goals that people have for that upcoming year. But people don't always finish their New Year's resolution. Actually, by the end of January, only 1 out of 4 people, that's 25%, are still pursuing their New Year's resolution. And that's because New Year's resolutions are difficult. They have different things that come up that make it difficult, even with their best intentions or the most planning that they can put in. They have some form of opposition when they're trying to pursue these goals. So you all might have goals. You might have spiritual, relational, or God-sized goals. And whatever goals you have right now, I have good and bad news. And I'm going to start with the bad news. The bad news is this, that if you haven't already, the chances of you experiencing some form of opposition during these goals is high, right? You're going to experience frustration, a lack of motivation, or someone might oppose you in the goals that you have. But then here's the good news. The good news is that even when you face this opposition, you can have hope, even when your goals might be too much to handle on your own. And before you get discouraged or feel weak about pursuing your goals, let's look at the story of Nehemiah. So just to recap, Nehemiah was this guy who was part of Israel during the Old Testament. And Israel had been taken from their land. Their city had been destroyed. And Nehemiah had this vision or this goal that to rebuild the temple. The temple was really important for the people. And so he had this God-sized goal to go back to Israel and to rebuild the temple. And so he spent months in prayer and planning. And then he finally went to the king and asked the king for his blessing to go, return, and to build this wall. Well, the king agreed, and Nehemiah went back to Jerusalem, where he began to assess this process of rebuilding the wall. But not everyone was excited about that. He started to build this team, and there were people who were so excited that the wall would be built. But he found himself against opposition. Once he arrived in Jerusalem, Nehemiah got to work. He convinced a ton of people living in Jerusalem to work together to repair the city walls. And if you want to see how many people he recruited or some of the jobs that he gave, read Nehemiah chapter 3. But he gave jobs such as to Uziel to start, who was a goldsmith, to make repairs where there needed to be repairs. He asked Hanan to repair the valley gate. And he asked someone else to repair a section of the Tower of Ovens. And this stood out to me because I just pictured a bunch of ovens stacked on top of each other, right? And there are many other tasks and many other people he asked to be a part of his plan. Now, you might wonder, why does the Bible include this? Why doesn't the Bible just get to the point to say that, okay, Nehemiah is building the wall? I think it's because of this. Because there were so many people involved, right? This wasn't a project that Nehemiah could fix or do on his own. He needed other people. And so it was a team effort, right? And it was a team effort because he received opposition. We talked about that a little bit last week, but we're going to talk about it some more today. So we're going to read from Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. Now when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he mocked the Jews. He said in the presence of the associates and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore things? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish it in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heap of rubbish and burn ones at that?" Tobiah and the Ammonite was beside him and said, "The stone wall they are building, any fox going up on it will break it down." So Nehemiah faced opposition. People were calling him weak. People were mocking the quality of his work, right? Their work was so poor that if a fox came upon it, the whole wall would come down. A stinking fox would destroy the work that they had built. Think about that. That's a big insult. And then they were mocked for their beliefs, and their opponents tried to crush their hopes. Even though Nehemiah and his team were being obedient to God, they still had to deal with the haters. They still had opposition to their plans. Now, we're going to continue reading the story to see how Nehemiah faced this opposition. And verse 4, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their taunt back on their own heads and give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt, and do not let their sin be blotted out from your sights, for they have hurled insults in the face of the builders." So we rebuilt the wall, and all the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. So I think there are a few things that are important here. I think first, we see that Nehemiah didn't get distracted. When his opponents faced him, he didn't fight with them. He didn't add to the drama. He didn't call them names, right? He didn't even respond. But instead, he took it to God, right? He asked God to hear his prayer and to make it right. This is something that Nehemiah has done throughout the entire story. He has constantly gone to God and asked for God's guidance and help in achieving this goal. And he was honest here to God. He said, "God, I need your help, but also I want them to be punished for what they're doing, how they're opposing me," right? He was honest with God. But then Nehemiah got back to work. He and his team kept building no matter what those guys had to say. They rebuilt the wall to half its original height, and everyone poured all that they had into their work. And that's amazing that Nehemiah and his community were able to push through even when they had opposition. And if we were to read throughout the rest of the chapter, we would see that Nehemiah faced more opposition from these people. Some of these people, they obviously saw that they had built half the wall, and they noticed that they were going to continue building the wall. So they devised a plan to plot against Nehemiah and the wall. But Nehemiah and the people prayed for protection. So they went forward with their plan to build the wall. But they were worried that those who had already opposed them would attack. So Nehemiah gave half the people the job of looking out for their opponents, and he gave them swords, spears, and bows. And then the other half, they were able to work. And he also did something spectacular. He gave them time to rest, right? Which it can be really difficult for us when we're embracing the grind to take time to rest. But Nehemiah did that. And after so much opposition, the strength of Nehemiah's team was giving out. The bullies were relentless, but Nehemiah was committed and strategic in achieving his goals. So Nehemiah took it to God again. Like I said, this is a continual thing from the very beginning to the very end. Nehemiah was in constant conversation with God, asking for God's strength and guidance to achieve this goal. He prioritized rest. He knew that his team needed rest, and if they were going to continue working. So he found a way for them to work in shifts. Then Nehemiah chose community. Nehemiah's team committed to protecting and supporting each other as long as they had the task ahead of them to rebuild the wall. And Nehemiah kept going forward, right? He kept moving forward, adjusting his plan when he had to, and getting creative when he needed to in order to accomplish this God-sized goal. I wish I could tell you that Nehemiah's opposition ended in chapter 4, but if we were to read chapters 5 and 6, we would see that this opposition continued from these opponents, but also from the Jewish people, his own people, right? And at one point, Nehemiah even received terrifying letters and death threats, because these men did not want to see Nehemiah to finish the work of the wall. But let's read Nehemiah chapter 6 to see how he responds. And we're just going to read chapter 6, verse 9. For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking, their hands will drop from their work, and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. Strengthen my hands, Nehemiah prayed. He could have asked God for anything, but he simply asked for strength to finish his work. We need to be like Nehemiah when we face opposition in our plans and our goals, whether they're our small goals or our God-sized goals, right? We need to ask God to help strengthen our hand. I think about a time when I needed God's strength to achieve a goal. So I was a senior at Mount Vernon. I was taking one of the hardest classes that was in the religion department, and it was Theology 2. It was spring semester, and I had already taken Theology 1 in the fall semester. And theology was a difficult class because theology can be a difficult subject, but also there was a lot of reading, and there was the final research paper that was like 20 pages long. You had to do hours and hours of research and then hours of writing. And my professor was very difficult when he graded. And so I needed to do this paper to graduate. But some of you might have heard of something called senioritis. I had senioritis. I was a senior. I was about to graduate, and I didn't have a lot of motivation. I just wanted to graduate and move forward in life, because after graduation, I was going to marry Lauren, and we were going to move to Kansas City. And I just couldn't wait for that to happen. And so I didn't have a lot of motivation. I needed strength to accomplish this term paper that I had, to do the hours of research, to write it, and then to submit it and present it to my class. And so I prayed and I asked God to give me strength. I admitted that, God, I don't really want to do this right now. I wish we could just skip forward to graduation and all this would be behind me. But that couldn't happen. And so I asked God to give me strength and to help me to figure out how to move forward to complete this paper. And so I reached out to community. I asked my friends to help give me support. Lauren gave me support as well. I created a schedule to help me do this. I locked myself in my room a few times and said, you need to research for this paper. I said no to things that I wanted to do. And eventually I was able to write this paper, and I turned it in and I presented it to the class. And it was because God helped give me the strength to continue through with this goal of graduating. And not only did I finish the paper, but I actually ended up getting an A on it, right? And so we all face some form of obstacles in life, right? Whether it's in our smaller goals, like a paper, or if it's in our God-sized goals, like building the walls of Jerusalem. Although God never promises that life and our goals will be easy, here is what we are promised. We are promised that we don't need to be afraid when God gives us a God-sized goal. We don't need to be afraid because God's Spirit is with us, and that God will give us strength when we seek to achieve these God-sized goals. Right? And these God-sized goals can also, and when we face opposition in these God-sized goals, we can start to receive a gift from them, right? We can receive a gift because it can be an opportunity to strengthen our faith, to rely on God more, or to grow in our love for God and for other people. So when you see or you face an opposition when you're trying to pursue a God-sized goal, take a step back and ask God, how can I learn or grow through this opposition, through this difficulty? Just like Nehemiah planned to experience opposition and difficulties, we too should also plan to expect difficulties when we're pursuing God-sized goals. But here is the good news, right? I said there was bad news earlier, and I kind of left you hanging on the good news. And the good news is this: no matter what the world throws at us, God gives us the strength to pursue God-sized goals. I'm going to say that again. God gives us strength to pursue God-sized goals, right? We're going to face opposition. That was the bad news. We're going to feel frustrated. We might not feel motivated. People might oppose us. But when that happens, when we're pursuing God-sized goals, God will give us strength. So when we need this strength to pursue God-sized goals, you can do a few things like Nehemiah did. You can take it to God. You can invite God into this process, right? God was involved from the beginning until the end of Nehemiah's goal. You can choose community, people to help support you in pursuing this God-sized goal. You can rest, right? Rest can help us accomplish the goals that we have in life. And we can continue to push forward, relying on the strength that God has given us. I look forward to talking about this with you all on the Google call, and I also look forward to hanging out and playing some games. So I'll see you all in just a few moments.